Well, I'd love to say it was just because I had an interest in health and well-being. Unfortunately, it came at the cost of my own health. And pretty much as a child, I was sick all the time and had colds and flus, and I was immune to penicillin by the time I was 9. And that led to more intensity into when I hit 18. I had the kissing disease, mono. Doctors were like, just rest and you'll be fine. But I didn't get better. And it was at that time that I saw over 8 different specialists, and I had been put on more than 20 different medications, and I was really toxic and very sick from those side effects of those drugs. And no one could help me. And my mother was having lunch with a friend, and he said, Linda, how's your daughter doing? And she was crying and just said, I don't know what to do. And he basically had given my name to a medical intuitive who came up and said I was loaded with something called Candida. And my mom's like, what's that? And literally a week later, Dr. William Crook was the first second medical doctor to really popularize the yeast connection. And that book fell in my lap, and it changed my life. I took the questionnaire, and I had almost every symptom. And I was suffering severely from yeast overgrowth. And I followed a protocol of an anti-Candida diet. I took an antifungal drug powder called Nilstat. And it took me 1 year, and I felt amazingly better. But unfortunately, I didn't know, having had such an intense case, that the yeast can come back more virulently if you don't stay balanced. And so, 24, I'm in a restaurant. I'm having lunch with a friend, and to you, it looked like I had a conscious epileptic attack. I couldn't breathe, swallow. I started tremoring, and within 2 weeks, the doctor said, well, the great news is you don't have cancer. The bad news is you have multiple sclerosis. And get ready for the wheelchair, and and that was really the answer. So really, that's how my path became, because that was a 4-year tumultuous journey of trying to figure out how to get out of that. Well, the good news was at that time, all they had was chemotherapy. And I looked at my mother and I said, if I take this chemo, I'm not going to make it. Since that was the only option, I looked at my mother, and I'm an only child. And I said, Mom, if I take this, I'm not going to make it. So will you support me in going an alternative route? I didn't know what I was going to do. And so it was mainly just leaving that office and knowing there's got to be a way to heal. And what little research I was able to do and was available at that time was I went back to realizing Candida, there might be a connection of fungal overgrowth with autoimmune disease. I replaced 15, 16 silver amalgam fillings because I knew mercury was very toxic to the body. I worked on emotional, mental factors because I feel that was key in what really brings chronic disease around. And it was just pure will to live. I was 24 years old and I was completely debilitated. I could get to the bathroom and back to the couch, and that was my life for 8 months. And I had immune response attacks like what I'd had in the restaurant daily. And I was petrified to be in my body. And I went through a near-death experience 3 months into it. And after that experience, I want to say it's much easier on the other side, but when I was out in the ethers, let's say, the message was, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And it was very clear there's more for you to do. And after that, experience, I was so set on knowing there was a way to heal the body. And what I discovered is time and tenacity does prevail. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't cry every day. It didn't mean I had hopelessness and despair most of the time until I started to become more ambulatory. So it was really a fight of I was too young and I just didn't feel it was my time to leave the planet. Mm-hmm. Candida is a single-celled organism. It starts that way. It's ubiquitous. It lives in everybody's body, male, female, child, and it stays balanced until we upset the ratio. And pretty much where we focus in seeing Candida overgrowth happens in the gut. So we talk about the microbiome, which is the balance of good to bad bacteria in the gut. And you want to have ideally 85% good bacteria to 15% not so good. In this 15%, that's where that Candida resides. The things that would throw it into an overgrowth state, because you're starting to wipe out the good bacteria, which allows this to overgrow, are antibiotics, steroids, birth control, hormone replacement, chemo, radiation, sugar, stress, and alcohol. So let me give you an example. You could be 7 years old, you have an ear infection, you take a round of antibiotics, which wipes out good and bad bacteria in the gut. Without enough good, the yeast starts to multiply. People go, that was 20 years ago, how could that be me? I said, what do you love to eat? How do you manage your stress? Everything that turns into sugar rapidly will feed this yeast through a lifetime. So it could be cheeses and milks and breads. It can be alcohol because that's liquid sugar if it's wine. It can be desserts. And then maybe you take another round of antibiotics, or maybe you had to take a steroid inhaler because you had asthma. Eventually, the single-celled yeast will turn to a root fungal form. And then you have your intestinal wall, which, you obviously get things through, but you don't want it to be too permeable. And what's attacking this today, this is known as leaky gut, is gluten, which are the proteins in wheat, barley, rye, genetically modified food organism, and fungus are creating more of this leaky gut. And when fungus gets out into the bloodstream, this doesn't do so much of the damage, it's the waste products. And those waste products will go where you're most vulnerable. It'll compromise your immune system. Just as the gut can get leaky, so can the lungs and so can the brain. So if someone is more vulnerable in the brain, they're going to have brain fog, memory issues, anxiety, depression. In my case, it was MS. For someone else, it might go to the lungs. It's, asthma and, and environmental allergies. So the longer it's in that overgrowth state, then you become a host to it. The mild symptoms are, it's sinus issues, it's eczema, it's toenail fungus, it's jock itch. It can be any of those things that are associated. So, and usually fatigue is a big deal, and also anxiety and depression. And the goal then is to do the anti-Candida diet and take an herbal antimicrobial, knock out the excessive fungus, bring it back into single-celled yeast, and get it back into 85% to 15% ratio. And when you do that, you also put viruses to bed, you clean up bacteria and parasites, etc. I think for me, definitely there was anger and rage. And as much as I would have never wanted to go through what I have, it worked. Because when you're, suicidal and you're hopeless, you're not going to fight for your life. But if you're angry, you will. But I think below the anger was much more. There was kind of an epiphany that happened for me. I had been through lockdown, 2.5 months of halfway houses, a lot of maltreatment, and all I had were the clothes on my back. I never knew if I'd see reality. My mother felt I was too fragile to be back in her house. I didn't know if I'd see anything again, the way I knew life to be. And I hadn't spoken to God for many months. I felt betrayed. I thought, I'm a good soul. I don't understand what's going on here. And one day I just sat on the edge of the bed and I proclaimed and said, God, I might be really screwed up right now, but I don't deserve this treatment anymore. And that sounds very benign, but I realized in that moment, it didn't matter whether mommy, daddy loved me, how much money I had, whether I was healthy or not. I realized that if I was in this carnal body, which I was, that was proof of my worth. Because really what it all stemmed was I didn't feel good enough and I didn't feel worthy. And that's why I was a perfectionist. And that is the cause of most conditions that I see, is that anger will come along, but it's always that you're overcompensating because you're not feeling good enough and you're trying to prove yourself. And so once I made that realization that everything, if you're here, just waking up is enough and everything else you do in life is gravy. And it gave me tremendous momentum after that. I was literally out of that place in 2 weeks. And within 3-4 months, I was back working in the record business, and then I ended up leaving that very soon to realize I wanted to pursue a path of healing and become a healer. So it was really a pinnacle moment, and the way I work with fear-based emotions with my clients is to help them identify it. That's kind of my knack, is taking complexity and simplifying it, and also going to the root of where they're stuck. So if I can at least bring it to the forefront and then offer them possible modalities, because everybody's different, of ways they can tackle that, and to let them know that it's okay to have that. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have rage. It's okay to have sadness. I think we're always trying to put on a presentation of being something we're not. And one thing I learned along the way of letting go of perfectionism, and by the way, I changed the meaning of that, it's still not a bad word, was it's none of my business what other people think of me. And I gave so much power away through my whole life on that one. And I'm not perfect at that, but it was really important because I could do cartwheels in front of you and you could still think I'm a jerk. So I can't change what you're going to think of me. But the reality is the more that I put my attention into honoring myself and realizing I'm unique and living out my life's purpose, it's all good. One is I let them know that the body's amazing. If I didn't believe it had the capacity to heal, not only from my own experience, but what I've witnessed over the years, I wouldn't do this work. So one is because when you look at today's advertising, you're seeing that you need a drug for every twitch and itch and abrasion, and it's not the way it is. The body's magical. It knows exactly what to do. You just have to clean up the environment long enough to remove infection and inflammation. And basically, I discovered this when I was 24, that if I held in there long enough, I changed my belief systems, which are not laws written in stone. You can change them anytime. Most of these are hand-me-downs from parents and society. And so I chose to change that belief that I could heal. And then you follow it through, because you might have a belief, you can grasp it and change it very quickly, but physical matter does not move as quickly, so you have to give it the right environment with good nutrition, etc., detoxification, etc., and get there to be able to get what you're looking for to change that DNA. But one of my favorites was a kid named Mark. I was early on in my practice. He was 14 years old, and he had ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune of the large intestine. And he was having, sorry to be graphic here, but he was having 8 bloody diarrhea movements a day. And he was stick thin, and he was seeing the top specialist in Los Angeles. And he was on 40 Asacol pills a day, which are anti-inflammatories, and he had already done 3 rounds of steroids. And the physician said to him, if you have another bout, we're going to take your colon out. This is a 14-year-old boy, never gone on a date, and this is what I was presented. So I looked at him and his mother and I said, you're not going to like me. You're not going to be able to eat what all your friends are eating. I said, but let's go for it. And within 1 month's time, he was back to bowel movements that were normalized. And within 3 months, he was a brand new kid. And I still get emails to this day.
How old is he?
Well, I don't know. I think he's got to be in close to 20s or something like that. I think I heard from the mother a couple years ago. And so he's doing fantastically well. And, that's one that feeds my soul, because I just saw this child who was just trying to develop and, like I said, do life. And he, was able to return and feel vibrant and healthy and educated. That's the big thing too that I love, is that it's not, what I love most about what I do is not only seeing people come back into their skin and thrive, but usually then they have the energy, the focus, and going through that journey then gets them in touch with what they're passionate about. And then when I hear from them years later, they're doing things they never thought they would dream of. We're so polluted, more chemicals, more stress, more environmental toxicity. So there has to be more personal accountability if you want to age with quality. And that's really what I'm doing for myself, is I want to age with quality. And I meditate. I forgot to mention that. I will meditate maybe 10 minutes in the morning, and certainly exercise. So I really, now at 50, I honor myself more than I ever have, and I'm enjoying it. It's easy. It's not work for me. It's not a have to. It's a want to. I'm Boroch, and I'm a certified nutritional consultant and a naturopath.